Thank you to my patrons and members for voting this video. Have you ever wondered what the first anime ever was? Well, if we're talking about weekly anime, it was created by this Japanese guy who was a teen arms manufacturer in World War II, then got a medical degree, then became the god of manga and TV anime. This guy is Osamu Tezuka, and his story is crazy. Tezuka was born on November 3rd, 1928, in Osaka and came from a prestigious, highly educated family. From this posh background, his mother often took him to the Takarazuka revue musicals. Essentially, these all-female theater tropes with fancy dances. These women performing became Tezuka's very first inspiration for storytelling and art. Growing up, he loved comics like Nora Kuro and Fuku-chan. Don't worry, I've also never heard of them. He also really liked Mickey Mouse. Except this was old Japan, so he discovered it through a pirated version of Mickey. One other thing child Tezuka loved was insects. We'll get to that later. As Tezuka grew into a teen, global tensions rose and World War II broke out. In 1941, he studied at the prestigious Kitano Middle School, which is actually a high school, whatever. But as the war intensified, teen Tezuka, at only 16 years old, had to be mobilized to an arms factory to produce weaponry for the war. He survived the war, but horrifically watched as his hometown Osaka was engulfed in flames and rubble by the endless air raids. Amongst these chaotic times, as a way to comfort himself, Tezuka started sketching what we now know as manga, something similar to the comics he loved as a kid. Eventually, Tezuka graduated high school and enrolled in Osaka Imperial University Medical School Specialized Program, which was essentially an emergency wartime training course for doctors, because, you know, they kind of lost the war and people were dying. However, even as a med student, Tezuka continued to draw manga, and this would be his starting steps into his life of manga. Right as the war ended, Tezuka made his first steps into professional manga. Even as a fresh med student, he debuted a 4-panel comic strip series called Diary of Ma-chan in the Mainichi elementary school newspaper. Tezuka continued around publishing some short manga here and there in some local newspapers and magazines, but only 1 year into his career, Tezuka would have his breakthrough. In 1947, Tezuka published New Treasure Island with another older artist, Shishima Sakai. It was first only published on cheap paperback, but it became a massive bestseller, suddenly selling 400,000 copies that year. Remember, this was before the manga industry was really a thing, and Japan was just recovering from losing the war. Those numbers at that time were insane. It was unprecedented. If you look into the contents of New Treasure Island at the time, you would immediately understand its success. Tezuka made this comic very differently from the traditional way. See, while most Japanese comics at the time were just gag cartoons with a few lines of dialogue, Tezuka used his art to tell a story. Show, not tell. He drew dynamic panel layouts, cinematic angles, and even a coherent long-form adventure story. It was as if a story was being conveyed cinematically through illustrations, like a movie in a book. Of course, that is what we now know as the basis for modern manga. The impact of New Treasure Island was astounding. Readers and artists were inspired. I mean, he essentially created a new medium, and artists saw endless possibilities. There were artists volunteering to work for him, visiting his house, literally worshipping him, calling him a godlike presence who overturned the common sense of comics. If you look back, there are countless future giants of manga who were inspired by Tezuka, like these on screen, but we won't get into that. Seeing his newfound success formula, Tezuka worked as a new author and continued to create long-form adventure stories, particularly science fiction stories such as Lost World, Metropolis, and Next World. Mind you, during all of this, he was still in med school. Bro was dissecting bodies, then going home to draw manga. Apparently, by his own genuinely psychopathic schedule, that's coming from me, he was finishing 1 to 2 volumes of manga per month, all while doing med school full-time. This is the guy that Asian parents are talking about when they say they're going to school with one foot and starting a business with the other. Funnily enough, it was exactly these insane self-imposed deadlines that forced Tezuka to use time-saving techniques like reusing stock character designs and visual gags, stuff that modern mangakas still use to this day to save on time. Tezuka finally graduated from Osaka Med School and and got his physician license in 1952. So what did he decide to do? Not be a doctor. Instead, being a mangaka. Around the 1950s, Japan's publishing industry began shifting from standalone book manga to serialized magazine formats, so Tezuka jumped at this new opportunity. In 1950, he made his way to Tokyo for a pitch to editors Kenichi Kato, an editor of a new kids monthly called Manga Shonen. Impressed by Tezuka's works, he was immediately offered a serialization where Tezuka began Jungle Emperor, a jungle adventure about a brave white lion cub. It was a beloved story, but his next creation would be one known to this very day. In 1952, as his serialization in the Shonen magazine continued, Tezuka started writing a one-off called Ambassador Atom, but seeing potential in his new creation, he eventually decided to launch it in the Shonen magazine as a continuing series, renaming it Astro Boy, a manga about a kind-hearted robot boy fighting for justice, created by a scientist who lost his son. Astro Boy blew up in Japan, cementing Tezuka's name. The main reason was behind the themes of the story. See, Japan had just lost World War II and was, quite frankly, in shambles. Astro Boy presented a hopeful vision of science and technology helping people. While technology at the time was mainly a thing developed for military reasons, Astro Boy reflected post-war optimism about science's potential, that hey, it can be used for good. I mean, Astro Boy, named Atom in Japanese, is quite literally named after atomic, like atomic bomb, and his sister, Uran, named after uranium. And you know, Japan, atomic bomb, yeah. Astro Boy was this symbol of hope for this rebuilding nation after the disaster of the war. With his mainstream success, Tezuka finally decided that it was time to move to Tokyo. He left his Osaka roots and moved into an apartment that would become legendary in manga lore, the Tokiwaso. So you know how some YouTubers live together in this giant shared content creation house? Now imagine that but with mangaka. The difference was that manga was still in its early stages at the time, and aspiring mangaka were generally teens, so even at 25 years old, he was a senior at the house, a mentor figure. It was in this very house that future manga giants like Fujiko Fujio, Shotaro Ishinomori, Hideko Mizuno were nurtured by working as Tezuka's assistants. This is the main reason Tezuka is now called the god of manga, because to those young mangaka working in that house for their dream, he was a god. Continuing through the 1950s, Tezuka continued making hit after hit such as Princess Knight and Phoenix. By that time, his fame was nationwide, and he was quite literally selling millions of copies. But with such success came a cost. Having a life. Tezuka's entire life just became work. He was serializing in 6 different magazines simultaneously. 6! Most mangaka today can barely handle 1! He himself admitted that he barely slept during this period and was fueled by pure passion and random naps. By 1958, Tezuka received formal accolades for his influential works. He won the 3rd Shogakukan Manga Award for his educational manga, Manga Biology, and kids manga, B-chan. Over this time, he made dozens of manga. But there was one very distinctive thing about all his works. The art style with cute characters and large round eyes. The basic template for the modern manga and anime characters we know today. As Tezuka became the king of the print world, he looked back to his childhood and yearned to work on his first love, what got him on this path in the first place: animation. At the time, Japan's animation industry was just beginning, mostly with a few movies produced by Toei Animation. Tezuka decided to try working for Toei as a contracted writer/artist, working on the movie Sayuki. It was there that Tezuka learned all about animation firsthand, how to plan, how to, well, animate. After 2 to 3 years of experience, Tezuka decided that he had learned enough. He was ambitious. He wanted to start his own studio. And so he did. He recruited a few talented co-workers he met in Toei and established Mushi Production. Mushi means insect in Japanese, cause, you know, he liked insect as a child. Oh, speaking of child, this was actually when he got married and had a child. Anyway, with the new studio came a new beginning and their first project, a 39-minute art film titled titled Tales of a Street Corner, fully funded by Tezuka himself out of pocket. What's unique about this work was it had zero dialogue, only music and animation to convey a story conveying an anti-war message. The film took about a year to complete and released in 1962. The result? It won critical acclaim, including the Art Festival Encouragement Prize and the Ofuji Nobudo Award. But this wasn't enough for Tezuka. He was the god of manga. If he could revolutionize one medium, he could revolutionize another. It was about this time in the 1960s that TV was starting to become a really big thing, and while networks were searching for all sorts of new ideas in the Wild West, Wild East, Tezuka thought, what if they made a full 30-minute weekly TV anime series? At the time, anime hadn't become a big thing yet, and no one had ever done that because, well, it would require an absurd amount of work and money for something that's never been tested. It was not seen as a smart business move. But Tezuka was an artist before a businessman. So he basically said, you know what? I'm doing it, even at a loss. And so he did. And what better way than to start with his legendary manga, Astro Boy. On January 1st, 1963, Astro Boy premiered on Fuji TV, occupying a weekly primetime spot. This was the very first anime in history to air on a regular weekly schedule with half-hour episodes. And just like the manga, a hit it was. Children across Japan were glued to their seats to see their manga hero Astro Boy come to life in animation, 30 minutes a week. Now, if you notice the date, you would realize that I said January 1st, 1963, which is less than 1 year since their previous project aired. Yeah, this thing was rushed. Just like the early days of drawing manga, in order to make deadlines, they had to innovate techniques to cut costs, like using limited animation, the Blue Lock Season 2 method, and reusing footage, essentially inventing the cost-saving anime production techniques used by isekai today. The most respectable part, I think, is despite the fact that Tezuka was essentially the president of the company, he still directed episodes and worked on the anime because he was an artist at heart. Because if we look at the business side of things, it wasn't going so well at first. Even with sponsorship deals, it's reported that each episode cost more to make than it earned. But over time, Astro Boy's anime gained levels of fame one could have never imagined at the time. It became a cultural icon and continued airing for 193 episodes, even being one of the first ever Japanese shows to be exported to the West and dubbed in English. With this one show, Tezuka had effectively become the father of TV anime, paving the way for Japan's future anime industry. On a side note, you know, all of these achievements are incredible, but if you look behind the scenes, I genuinely don't know how he survived working like this. Tezuka's company was growing fast, up to 400 employees at the time, and just because he started working towards animation doesn't mean he stopped drawing manga. During this period, he was literally working on multiple anime projects in the day, then drawing manga at night. And if this wasn't bad enough, bro somehow found the time to do a PhD in medicine amongst all of this, only to never use it, ever. He never went back to work in medicine, he just decided one day that he wanted a PhD. What are you doing? How are you working 2 full-time jobs and a PhD at the same time? Well, other than his work, no-life balance, commercially, everything was going very well. Tezuka had a second child in 1964. He essentially became a celebrity with his status, often appearing in talk shows and interviews, and new exciting projects were in the works. 1965, Mushi Productions launched Japan's first color TV anime series, Jungle Emperor, right as color TVs were starting to become widespread. Boom, another hit. Bro even achieved a personal dream and got to meet Walt Disney in person at the New York World's Fair, where they shook hands and Disney personally invited him to work at their studios. Although Tezuka declined, committed to growing Japan's own anime industry. Imagine modern anime if he actually went to Disney. Up until this point, for over 20 years, it seemed as if Tezuka was unstoppable. His entire life, all he had to do was want to do something, and success would come to him like moths to a flame. Cosmic intervention. But for the first time, things were about to go horrifically wrong. The first problem was a pretty bad controversy in 1965 called the W3 incident. Tezuka had started a new sci-fi manga series called W3 in the weekly shonen magazine, sponsored by Lotte, a snacks brand. But at the same time, another TV show called Space Boy Soran, sponsored by a rival candy company, had a similar premise and was being promoted in the same magazine issues. Tezuka found this suspicious, that perhaps someone leaked his concept to purposely make a competitor. Lotte also didn't want their show appearing alongside a competitor's in the magazine. For these reasons, Tezuka just said, "I'm done," and just abruptly pulled the manga out of Shonen magazine after only 6 chapters, suddenly changing publishers to Weekly Shonen Sunday. This enraged the people at Weekly Shonen and destroyed relationships between the two. It's even said that one editor tore up a Tezuka drawing in anger. Tezuka later apologized in the afterword of a reprint, saying he didn't blame anyone and that it was due to circumstances at Mushi Pro and sponsor conflicts, although we'll never really know the full story. Souring relationships with one of the biggest publishers in the industry was certainly a thing, but it only gets worse. By the mid-1960s, the manga industry was changing. This medium that used to be seen as for children now had a movement towards more mature, gritty manga. This in turn made Tezuka's kid-friendly manga unappealing to teens, them thinking it was childish or immature. Tezuka wasn't just gonna take it. He had always wanted to deviate from his kid manga and write something more mature, so he tried his hand at it in both anime and manga to prove that he was still the god of manga. In 1967, Tezuka founded a whole new manga magazine, Calm, to compete with other publishing magazines. He serialized a more mature work, Phoenix, in the magazine, but his animation studio was where all the true effort came in. Mushi Pro launched a project called Anime Rama, a trilogy of, let's just say R18 films, 1001 Nights, Cleopatra, and Belladonna of Sadness. It wasn't even just about proving himself. He had always wanted to do this kind of series, but felt he couldn't as his parents would have disowned him back then, and even in the past 2 decades, there was this stereotype that manga was for kids. But now was the perfect time. Well, did he, the god of TV anime, succeed? No, he did not. The R18 films financially didn't do very well despite critical ratings because kids, his main audience, were blocked out of watching it. Calm wasn't doing that hot either, causing Phoenix, a work by the god of manga, to struggle. Another manga he wrote, Dororo, also didn't have good reception and was cut short in the Shonen Sunday magazine. But the problems only got worse. By the late 1960s, Mushi Productions was far overstraining itself, taking on way too many projects at once. Astro Boy, Jungle Emperor, W3, Princess Knight, Dororo were only a few of the many projects they had to work on in a few years span. Not to mention Tezuka needing to care about the business of his own manga magazine, Calm now. Tezuka tried his hand once again with new manga, but by 1971, it was too late. The bank account just couldn't handle the strain anymore. Costs from multiple projects and some mismanagement had piled up debts, and Tezuka stepped down as Mushi Pro's president in 1971. It's worse because he even bore personal liability for the studio's loans. Tezuka tried to salvage the situation by restructuring the company and producing the new series Fushigi na Merumo, but they ran out of time. In 1973, Mushi Productions went bankrupt. It was a dark period in Tezuka's life. The bankruptcy left Tezuka with huge personal debt, since he had acted as the guarantor for many of Mushi Pro's loans, and creditors came to his home knocking on his door, chasing and harassing him. He could barely provide for his wife and 2 kids. This was the lowest point of Tezuka's life. From god of manga and TV anime to broke family man in debt. Anyway, speaking of God, by some chance, a savior came. Kenzo Kasai. He was just a businessman who founded Aprika, a baby stroller company, but he was a huge Tezuka fan. Seeing his hero in a pinch, he helped Tezuka rebuild everything. Kasai paid off some debts and helped Tezuka reorganize under a new corporation, Tezuka Productions, preventing Tezuka's IPs from being seized by creditors. It's genuinely thanks to this man's help that Tezuka didn't lose the rights to even big series like Astro Boy. This random businessman might have saved the entire anime industry, bro. Back on his feet, Tezuka decided it was time for a comeback. He started a grand project, serializing Buddha, a manga series that would go on for a whole decade. But what really got Tezuka back in the mainstream was his next manga, Blackjack, serializing only a few months after the bankruptcy of his studio. Blackjack was about an unlicensed genius surgeon who charges outrageous fees for surgery. So this is where the med degree and PhD went to. It was the perfect mix of mystery and drama, loved by teens and adults, the very audience he had always wanted to prove himself to. This manga became a super hit and single-handedly got his new company's finances fixed. It even won him the 4th Japan Manga Artists Association Special Award in 1975. Then came a flurry of manga and Tezuka winning award after award after award. So many that I don't really want to read it all out. So, it's just here on screen. There. I also just wanted to point out that there was a manga he made called Message to Adolf. And yes, it's what you think it is. And yes, it won an award. Hitler manga was most certainly not on my bingo list when I was researching this video. Eventually, Tezuka reconciled with Shonen Magazine, and they created possibly the greatest honor a mangaka can receive: the complete works of Osamu Tezuka, a 400+ volume compilation of all of Tezuka's works. Tezuka was a national icon, but that wasn't enough. Oh no. Tezuka started going international. In 1980, he was invited to the San Diego Comic Con and received an Inkpot Award for achievement in comics, and was even invited to tour American universities giving talks on modern manga culture. You have to understand, this was 1980. Manga was barely known outside of Japan. He not only won awards for this unknown medium, he was giving university talks overseas in this decade. It's possibly one of the first instances of a Japanese manga artist lecturing in the West about the medium. It's amazing. As time went on, Tezuka continued to publish new manga, win more awards, and his status grew to an unbelievable level in Japan. In 1985, Tezuka's 40th anniversary, the city of Tokyo awarded him the Tokyo Cultural Honor. Despite accomplishing all of this, Tezuka never stopped his hands once. He continued making new series after new series, winning award after award, until one day, his decades of overwork and sleep deprivation finally caught up to him. In mid-1988, he started experiencing severe abdominal pain. That summer, Tezuka was hospitalized and diagnosed with stomach cancer. Yet, Tezuka just couldn't stop working. Even from the hospital bed, he just kept drawing. On November 1st, 1988, he left the hospital against advice to give what would be his final public lecture, a talk at his old elementary school, on the topic of life. On February 9th, 1989, Tezuka passed away at the age of 60. It is said that his final whispered words to a nurse were, "I'm begging you, let me work," as his hands mimed drawing in the air. As news of this legend's passing spread across the nation, the entire country mourned for him. The Japanese government awarded him the Order of the Sacred Treasure, 3rd class, a very special honor. Only a year after his death, the Tokyo National Museum of Modern Art held a full Tezuka Osamu exhibition. I think you can see just how special Tezuka was. He wasn't just any big mangaka. He was the god of manga. In Japan, Tezuka's birthday, November 3rd, has even been proposed by industry groups as Manga Day to honor the art form. Imagine Manga Day being named after your birthday. There's no higher achievement than that. And since 1997, the Tezuka Osamu Cultural Prize is awarded annually to outstanding manga artists. The name of this legend used for this award. It wasn't even just in Japan. In 2002, he was inducted into the Eisner Award Hall of Fame in America as a comic legend. Tezuka is possibly the most influential mangaka of all time, and without him, the manga we read and anime we watch today would be very, very different. He is called the god of manga and TV anime for a reason, and may this god rest in peace, knowing how much the influence of manga and anime has spread worldwide today. Special thanks to Vicente Pagani and all my other patrons and members for supporting the channel.